A new expansion comes with new exotics, and boy have I been enjoying this one. Moirai is the new Strand exotic chest for hunters that can be earned from completing the Edge of Fate's legendary campaign or as a possible drop from the Civ activity. This is the second Strand exotic hunters have received in the 2.5 years since Strand first released, and unlike Balance of Power, this one is actually good. So what does Moirai do? Well, when detonating a tangle with the Threaded Strike powered melee, the spike will instantly return to the player. If caught, it will duplicate the detonated tangle, adding one back into the player's hands to throw. Catching spikes that didn't contain a tangle will return more melee energy, improving your ability's uptime massively. So, before we can start to put a build together with Moirai, we should first really make sure we understand its main elements, that being tangles and Threaded Spike. Tangles are an elemental pickup that can be generated when defeating a target that is affected by a Strand debuff while you are on the Strand or Prismatic subclass. Each individual player can only generate a tangle every 12 seconds, with each one generated lasting 20 seconds each. And that's why this footage is going to cut away now. Tangles can be incredibly useful, both in combat and as a tool for traversal. Destroying one will cause it to explode, dealing damage to nearby enemies. However, it can also be picked up and thrown for a more direct ranged option. You can also grapple to it even when it's been thrown, which will completely refund your grapple charge. This makes it a fantastic option for diving headfirst into combat and as a tool to retreat when you realize diving headfirst was a mistake. Moving on to Threaded Spike, this is a ranged melee that acts like a homing missile. When thrown, it will seek up to 9 enemy targets, applying Sever on hit before returning to the player. On return, it will generate melee energy based on the amount of targets hit. If timed correctly, you can catch the spike as it returns to increase the amount of energy, and with Moirai, you can increase this amount by an additional 75% if the spike returns without a tangle. Threaded Spike can also be used to detonate tangles, which does not seem to count towards the maximum 9 enemies the spike can target. Nor does hitting a tangle seem to provide additional melee energy. It's worth noting that Moirai will change this behavior slightly, as it will cause the spike to instantly return to the player upon hitting a tangle, no matter how many targets the spike has previously hit, or how many are still around. This is important to understand and get a feel for because it adds a layer of strategy to this exotic. Throwing your melee directly at a tangle might seem like the obvious option in most scenarios, but since it will instantly return Threaded Spike to you without much energy, it might stop you from being able to use the spike on the next tangle that gets generated. Instead, throwing it at enemies might be more ideal, but only if you can predict the spike's path. The goal is to get the spike to target the tangle at the end of its path before returning to the player. It can be inconsistent, but this is how it tends to work. Every time the Threaded Spike lands a hit, it will immediately travel to the next closest target that's within its range. If the spike reaches its maximum limit, or cannot find any other targets in range, it will attempt to return to the player. So to get the most benefit out of your spike melee and this exotic, try to predict the path the spike will take based on the placements of enemies. You want to make sure the spike ends its path as close to any tangles as possible to ensure it tracks to that before returning to you. It's pretty much always worth doing this because even if your prediction is wrong and the spike never targets the tangle, as long as it hits a few enemies, you can catch it and immediately throw it again. And for me, this knowledge is key to using this exotic to its full potential. So now that we understand the core abilities Moirai relies on, let's discuss the actual build. We'll be running the Strand subclass for this one, mainly for the aspect Whirling Maelstrom, which is not available on Prismatic. This transforms destroyed or thrown tangles into a spinning ball of death that hones towards enemies and spreads unraveling on kills. This is one of my favourite aspects on Strand, and using Moirai, we'll be able to double it and give it to the next person. Combine this with Threaded Spectre, which will allow us to create a Strand decoy whenever we use our class ability Energy. This has a ton of uses in combat, as enemies will often choose to attack a decoy before attacking any nearby players. If an enemy gets too close or destroys it, it will explode, dealing damage and releasing 2 Threadlings. Just like tangles, these are incredibly useful both for combat and survival. You can use them to take pressure off your team to escape danger, deal additional damage to enemies that might be getting too close, or, most importantly, to lure enemies towards your tangles and maelstroms. For abilities, we'll be using Gambler's Dodge to generate melee energy on command. Note that the amount of energy generated is now tied directly to our melee stat, but more on that later. We'll also run the Grapple Grenade, as this not only pairs very nicely with all the tangles we'll be generating, but also it technically counts as a melee, meaning that anything that increases the damage of our Threaded Spike should also increase the damage of our grapple. For Fragments, I recommend Thread of Warding to give us Woven Mail when picking up Orbs of Power. This gives us a 45% damage resistance for 10 seconds and plays into our next fragment, Thread of Transmutation, which allows weapon kills to generate a tangle when we have Woven Mail and also provides plus 10 to our melee stat, which, as I've been alluding to, is important. Thread of Isolation will allow us to create a severing burst from targets that we land rapid precision hits on. This reduces the target's damage output by 40%, not only improving our survival, but also giving us another source to generate tangles. The fourth fragment is mostly down to personal preference. Thread of Propagation is a great choice if you're running strand weapons on your build, while Thread of Generation or Thread of Continuity are the safe bets in most situations. It might seem like an obvious choice, but I'd personally avoid Thread of Fury. It will create a ton of melee energy with this build, but with so many ways for us to generate and maintain our melee charge, I don't think it provides much value in practice. Weapons are entirely down to preference and the activity you're running, though if you're looking for recommendations, Quicksilver Storm is a great choice for its ability to generate tangles. I've also been really enjoying the new Strand Rocket Pulse that can drop from Pinnacle activities, and even though it's not Strand, Osteostriga synergizes really well with its constant tick damage, which can help proc Unraveling on any targets already affected by it. Lastly, if you can get a weapon with the new perk Proximity Power, that also pairs really nicely here. It grants a stacking bonus to our melee stat when getting kills with additional enemies nearby, improving the damage of both our Threaded Spike and Grapple Melee. Speaking of the melee stat, that'll be the main thing you want to build into. I recommend at least 100 to ensure we get the most amount of energy possible from our Gambler's Dodge. But going higher than that will also increase our melee damage, which I'd highly recommend, just as long as it doesn't come at the cost of your other stats. Get your grenade stat as close to 100 as you can without going over. This will improve how often you can use your grapple melee, but keep in mind that grapple does not benefit from increased grenade damage. Hey guys, Future Mallow here. Sorry to butt in on the video, but I was completely wrong here. Grapple melee not only does benefit from grenade damage boosts, such as the grenade stat going over 100, but it also benefits more from that as a damage boost than it does the melee stat. The melee stat will still improve our Threaded Spike where the grenade one won't, so I would prioritize that over grenade. But if you go over 100, it's just going to help the grapple melee even further, so yeah. I'm glad I researched that before I uploaded this, but I probably should have done it before I started editing. That's my bad. After that, try and get your class ability as high as possible. This will allow us to generate melee energy on command and create Threaded Spectres more often, which, as I mentioned before, is really useful. Don't worry too much about going over 100 here either, as while it will give you an overshield when you dodge, it's a very minor benefit unless you're going above 120. If you have the flexibility to build into anything else, I'd highly recommend weapons, just because increased reload and damage is pretty much always useful, but I wouldn't say this is a stat you should focus on. Lastly, let's look at the armor mods we can apply. On the helmet, you'll mainly want to focus on Siphon mods, as Orbs of Power are our only source of Woven Mail. Depending on your weapon choice, you might also want to add 1 or 2 ammo generation mods. For arms, Heavy-Handed is going to help us generate even more orbs anytime our spike or grapple gets a kill, and alongside that you can run a melee font to increase your melee stat, or Impact Induction and Focusing Strike to improve your grapple and dodge recharge rates. For the chest, just run whatever resistances best match your current activity. For legs, we'll run Absolution for better ability regeneration. Depending on your preferences, you can also run Recuperation for better healing on orb pickup, or Enhanced Athletics for better movement speed and jump height. You can also run a Surge for whatever weapon damage you'll be using the most. And lastly, for our class item, I recommend the Old Faithful combo of Reaper and Powerful Attraction for even more orb pickup, and Bomber for additional energy towards our grapple. And that's everything. Honestly, this build is a lot of fun, and one I'm using in most activities right now, including farming the Whisper mission solo on Expert, trying to farm better gear. There's a lot of potential here for customization, allowing you to tailor it to whatever you're playing. I'd say its biggest weakness is only that the super ability can be quite situational, which does hold me back from running it in boss encounters in raids and dungeons, which is a shame. But that's also an issue with Strand Hunter in general, and not one that's exclusive to this build or exotic. I've provided a link to the build in the description below, so go check it out and let me know what you think. I'll be making builds for both the new Titan and Warlock exotic in the future, I just need to get round to unlocking them first. So if that sounds interesting to you, stick around, maybe subscribe, and I'll see you later.